Hi, my name is Trevor, and this is 4 tips for beginning educators. So, I am an English student teacher currently, and this is based on a lot of field sort of experiences with other English related educators or student educators. So, while a lot of these tips will be centered and sort of explained through that lens, my lens, through the English lens, I've tried to design these tips in such a way that no matter what discipline you're in or you're teaching, there is something you can get out of it, hopefully. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and start. So, tip one, I would be confident in giving is titled Consistent Positive Reinforcement. And to explain this, we're going to have to talk a little bit about conditioning, that good behaviorist theory stuff, some operant conditioning. So, to explain a little, conditioning is a process that happens over time through repetition. The reinforcement of positive behaviors needs to be handled by the teacher for students with very sort of strict consistency for it to really take effect. The goal of any classroom is to impart a passion for further learning and development onto the students, and positively reinforcing a student's growth on a consistent basis might condition them to continue that growth outside of your classroom, right? In my own first field experience, and I'll be referencing this a lot, I was at a middle school. The teacher I observed made sure to, without fail, make every student feel positive about their contributions to the ongoing discussion that I was observing, which was about one of Ray Bradbury's short stories. No student ever seemed dejected or demotivated by any contributions that they made, which, work to effectively condition them to engage in a discussion no matter what their current level of knowledge was, therefore helping them to cultivate superior discussion skills as they continue to participate, right? And I think this is especially important in English classrooms where students who aren't intrinsically or self motivated struggle to stay engaged for these long readings and writings. Conditioning students positively during reading times and discussions is something that I try and do all the time, even at my own student teaching now, especially after that experience. And especially as I have, sort of worked to apply this myself, walking around and I talk to students during like silent reading time to ask them, hey, how's the reading going? How are you enjoying it? Just stuff like that. And I found that doing it sort of repetitively and consistently with the same students has shown me that those same students are more likely to sort of call me over and initiate that discussion on their own because I try and keep it so positive. And they associate that positive interaction just with talking with me. So now they're more likely to do it, and it gives me more chances to understand their knowledge and see their passion. And I think really seeing my first field experience tackle that really affects and impacts how I do it now and how I continue to look at it. Just to give you sort of further example on conditioning, but also positive reinforcement, sort of a two in one here. You'll see on the slide, we have a student looking at the teacher, right? And the teacher is smiling, right? Very important in the classroom at this student. So the student takes this and they might experience or exhibit positive behaviors as well. The student might smile back, right? Um, Over time, after lots of repetition and consistency of this positive reinforcement, of this positive interaction, eventually the student might begin to associate that positive interaction with not just the teacher, but the environment of the classroom, right? So eventually the student might exhibit these positive behaviors just because of the classroom environment. They might smile when they enter the classroom, for example, just because they're used to it. Um, and I think for promoting positive behaviors, both in and after and outside of the classroom, this consistent positive reinforcement is a really good way to sort of do that, condition your students to exhibit behaviors that are beneficial for development within the classroom. So, moving on. Tip number two, we're going to talk a little bit about constructivism. And to help us out, our best friend, even if you're a beginning educator, this guy will be familiar to you. Favorite pyramid implemented Bloom's taxonomy. Going to help us out. So tip number two, I would say, would be to, and I know this is a little broad, to make sure students have a solid foundation, no matter what level you're teaching at, right? Could be sixth graders, could be 12th graders. Um, to to sort of explain a little bit, as noted by Bloom's taxonomy, there are these levels of learning goals, and they're divided into these six different areas in order of building complexity. This graph here is from bottom to top in order of increasing complexity, for example. Generally speaking, in order to accomplish the next learning goal, students need to have achieved the previous. So you can't really expect a student to compare, just for, as an English example, to short stories, which comparing to short stories might be analysis in Bloom's taxonomy. It's pretty high up, right? If they don't understand how to apply particular key terms, such as theme or tone, and that might be comprehension or application in Bloom's taxonomy, depending on how you look at it. Taking note, I think, of when students need reinforcement of these key terms or foundational concepts is key in moving on to achieving future, more complex learning goals. Going back to that first field experience I was talking about earlier, key terms such as tone and plot were constantly reinforced during this discussion they were doing after the reading, in an effort to make sure the students were all at the sort of required level of understanding before continuing to discuss and analyze the short story. So in this way, student understanding is built in the logical order laid out by the taxonomy, and no students are left confused if they were maybe experiencing a misunderstanding regarding core concepts and terms. Now, reinforcing the basics may seem trivial, but for achieving more complex learning goals, students must have a degree of mastery over them. Um, and even this is something I try and do as well, especially after sort of that first field experience. Every time I talked with a student, especially while I was at the middle school, I always tried to make sure I defined the terms they were talking about. And sometimes it's as simple as describing like a key concept like theme, and a student's eyes will light up because all their struggles that they were currently working with were based on just a simple misunderstanding. So I think for reasons like that, it's really important to sort of always make sure you're going back to the basics to avoid those misunderstandings that affect all future, more complex thought in regards to your content. So it may seem trivial, but I think it's really, really important to keep in mind. Moving on. This one might seem even more trivial, but I have experienced it a lot, and I'm sure you've seen this too. Tip number three, walk around the classroom. We have our little animation here. It's our little teacher. He's walking around, looking at all the students. So, just to explain this one a little bit, we're talking about formative assessments here. That is, informal assessments, assessments for learning, where you, the teacher, are getting information not simply to ascertain students' mastery over the content or the course, the unit, but to promote further growth and development with the information you're getting during instruction, right? Now, I did another field experience where I interviewed lots of different educators, from retirees to student teachers, lots of different types. And every single person concluded that spontaneous informal assessments of student knowledge tended to be an excellent way of ascertaining students' current progress in the unit, but also like their levels of comfortability and really just like understanding of the current content that they're working with. And I noticed this not only pertained to asking students questions, it's not the only way to get this information, but I think one of the better, more important ways to obtain this information informally is by silently observing their behavior or their work at random times. Looking back to my first field experience, now I'm kind of able to see that the teacher I observe assessed the students in all of these ways, including constantly walking around the classroom, keeping an eye on students' work over their shoulders, asking them questions, and generally just never taking a seat during the entire period. One of my interviewees noted that he's begun wandering around his own classroom at random during silent work or reading, looking over students' assignments, or even the page numbers of their reading to evaluate and assess their sort of current level of progress and where they're at and their comfortability. He also found that by asking students informal questions as he walked, just one on one, quick, quiet questions over simple things like their opinions on the reading or how they feel about the assignment. Often, these tactics often provide him with great feedback on a given assignment by asking students throughout the day. So, if there's something wrong with the instructional method or assessments or assignments, he can sort of figure out what those are, what those issues are, and improve. Not only this, but going back to that reinforcement, that positive, consistent reinforcement again, by asking them and doing this consistently, he's reinforcing that he's interested in what they have to say. So students are now more willing and likely to ask him questions that they might otherwise be too shy to come to him about previously. Um, he mentioned that it was great for informally assessing progress over a particular assignment or unit and for giving students that positive conditioning that helps them to continue to grow, like we were talking about earlier. So it helps him to gain information about the classroom and the students and improve the instruction overall. Um, and also just sort of assess where students are at, what they might be struggling with. So yeah, I think this is also something I try and apply myself nowadays, and I walk around and constantly talking. I've experienced lots of these same things, so it's something I recommend to any beginning educator with absolute full confidence. Walk around your classroom, 100%. So moving on, tip number 4, provide students with a choice. Um, and here we've got all the students sort of choosing based on the board, one or two. So now we're talking a little bit more about summative assessments. These are assessments of learning, assessments really particularly designed to accurately evaluate students' level of mastery over particular sort of concepts and ideas. So, once again, looking back at that first experience of that I was at where I observed that teacher, I noted that the students had a degree of choice when it came to the reading and how to perform it of that short story. Not only were students given a choice of whether to read aloud as a class or to have the video read the story, and for them to follow along, but students were also allowed choices in terms of seating, lighting, almost everything to do with the environment. I think they even tossed the idea of going outside around, but it was much too cold. Having that degree of choice, even though it seems inconsequential to the lesson or the reading overall, seemed not only to motivate the students, but also provide them with a level of comfort and a sense of control during the assignments they were doing. Many students even mentioned that full classroom lighting tended to negatively affect their focus and comprehension during the reading, showing that had the students not had this choice, an assessment over their mastery or comprehension over the reading may have been inaccurate to a degree. Even the constructed responses students were working up to allowed for students to choose from a moderately wide array of prompts, which allowed the students to answer or write about the question that they were most comfortable with and felt the most confident in being assessed by. In this way, students are given more opportunities to display their strengths and mastery in ways that only the choices allow them to, as opposed to a sort of standardized one size fits all strategy where students might be more judged on some of their weaknesses. But by providing more prompts, more students had the opportunity to choose what they were more confident in and what they really understood and show the teacher what they know, right? Giving students choices in regards to learning, whether it be purely environmental or a choice regarding their assignments, like a choice board, is something I highly recommend to improve the accuracy of student assessments overall and give students the opportunities to display their strengths over certain coursework. So, that is 4 tips for beginning educators. Here cited is a text a lot of my information was sourced from, but the rest was all sourced from my own personal experiences. If I had to drive home sort of a particular core message, or I had to impart one sort of main idea, I suppose, I think consistency is what I would drive every tip sort of back to. Um, it goes back to conditioning, that positive reinforcement, doing things over and over again, the repetition of core concepts, and even keeping your assessments sort of consistent and the same so students aren't taken off guard or surprised by how a particular assignment is or how they're being tested. I think it's all important for keeping the classroom comfortable and for making sure students are being tested on what they know and being able to display their strengths for you as a teacher. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope, regardless of what discipline you're in, what you're teaching, you were able to get something out of this. That has been it. I hope you have a wonderful night.